so in today's video of which version did I rank #1, we're checking out OutRun. So of course, OutRun is an arcade racing game produced in 1986 by Sega, and it was a pioneering game for its time, known for its graphics and its really awesome gameplay. Someone actually recommended me doing this one, but I already had it on my list. How could I not forget OutRun? So unlike yesterday's R-Type video, unfortunately, OutRun had some very bad ports of this, but we're going to cover that. Now just bear in mind that we're going to cover portable systems, 8-bit systems, 16-bit, even 32-bit systems, and just remember that even portable versions of games sometimes can be much better than their counterparts. So anyways, without further ado, this is ranking OutRun. Now let me make this clear, I'm not a religious person, I'm more of agnostic, but after playing this ZX Spectrum port of OutRun, I felt like converting to a religion. So anyways, the ZX port of this is absolutely terrible. Although my speedometer was going around 190 to 200 miles per hour, the game more or less seemed like a slug walking. The spec had limited colours of course, but green just didn't work with this game. The controls felt very sluggish and really unresponsive. The only good redeeming thing about this port was the music. I literally felt like I was drifting into a coma whilst playing this version. Kids back in the day likely cried back in the day after playing this. Likely the slowest racing game I've ever played. The Atari 2600 had better racing games like this, such as Enduro. We all know that Specky was underpowered in certain aspects, but Chase HQ, which came out a couple of years later on the Specky, was one of the best among the ports of that particular game. So ZX Spectrum version of OutRun, avoid it. Next up, we have got the 1987 release on the Amstrad CPC. This version was almost close to being the worst in this list. The only reason it wasn't is because it had a few more colours than the Spectrum port. This port was just as slow, boring, no music at all, but some dull breaking sound effects, which just didn't cut it. The perception of speed was pretty much off as well. It actually didn't feel like you was moving at all at some point. If I didn't know a little better, I'd say this was a direct port of the Spectrum version with a few extra added colours to it. There was no major introduction, that iconic introduction with the flag and the people. Again, I truly feel sorry for the kids who had this once. Next up on this list, we have the Atari ST's 1988 release of this. So first of all, you've got the actual ability in this port to enable or disable the music. The gameplay, on the other hand, is very sluggish, specifically very sluggish when you're steering left or right. Music seems to abruptly skip from one track or another without fading. Didn't actually feel like I was driving, but rather just turning left and right just for the sake of it. There was no starting point with the flag and the people at the start of the first track. The use of colour palette is very nice in this version though. In-game music sound much like a C64 game, that SID chip sound. Perception of speed is very much off too, so not particularly a great port. Next up on the list, we have got the MSX2 version of OutRun. So this one released back in 1988, and this one was specifically a very interesting port. The game starts off just like any generic racing game from that era. Other cars on the track though were missing, which I was finding a little bit strange. The steering felt like being on the ice. It lacked that feeling of turning the vehicle as you're steering left and right. Sprite of the car wasn't badly drawn. Passing breeze music was mediocre, pretty typical of that age, nothing spectacular. Edges of the track were very pixelated though, compared to other versions of this game. Colours used wasn't nothing too special either, but to be mindful, this is essentially an 8-bit micro game, and it certainly makes the CPC and Spectrum versions look even worse than what they were. next up we have got the IBM PC DOS release of OutRun. This one released back in 1989. It's not particularly the greatest version of OutRun for several reasons. Firstly, that awesome summary type music has been absolutely demolished by this version. I just want to turn it off, to be honest, after 60 seconds of listening to it. Like other ports, there are no other cars on the track as you're racing. The use of colouring, however, is fairly good on this version. Steering the car left or right isn't really that good either. It almost felt like the MSX2 version, where it felt a little bit like I was steering left and right whilst being on ice at the same time. The good thing is, though, that the race actually starts with the iconic banner. Next up, we have got the 1988 release for the Commodore Amiga. It's a fairly good port of OutRun. It comes with music and sound effects, and much like the Atari ST version, you can actually disable or enable music whilst in game. The speed perception didn't feel too bad, and steering felt pretty good too. I did notice on several occasions that my car would drive through obstacles and other cars without any form of collision detection. Again, no grand entrance gate with the flags and the people when the game starts. Nice use of colour palette too, which is similar to the source material. So overall, a fairly good port of this. Next up, we have got the 1987 release of OutRun for the C64. This is actually a fairly good port. It's cut down on colours due to limitations of the C64 hardware. Very smooth to play with no slowdowns. Music is very faithful to the arcade original thanks to the superior SID chip. Speed perception is quite average in this port. This version also features music as well as braking sound effects. There's no grand entrance starting point with people hanging around. Steering left and right was very smooth and felt like I was actually playing a game. Next up, we have got the Sega Master System's 1989 release of OutRun. So the first thing I noticed when playing the Master System port of this was, where were the other cars on the track? The music to me actually sounded better on the Game Gear version, which I'm going to look at soon. Speed perception was pretty much spot on, as were the steering controls, which felt pretty tight. In terms of colours used, the Master System port was fairly faithful given its available palette of colours. This port also features a grand opening of the game, no lag whatsoever. If it wasn't for the absence of other cars, this would have made it slightly higher on this list. Next up on this countdown, we have got the Sega Game Gear's release of OutRun, which released back in 1991. When people say portable versions aren't fair to compare with main console versions, Game Gear's version of OutRun is a very good example of how some portable games can actually beat main console versions. So a really good part of this game is how fluid it runs. It features very good rendition of Pass and Breeze, the stage music, with sound effects added to at the same time. Speed perception is also there, and the steering feels really tight to control. Colours used are also good for this little portable version. Highly recommended, and if I was a kid with a Game Gear rather than a Game Boy, I would have been very happy with this version. Next up in this list, we have got the 1990 PC release or TurboGrafx 16 release of OutRun. Oddly enough, the first thing that struck me with this port is, why is the sky a light green? And why isn't the C on the side at all like in the other versions? This port does have the ability to disable car sounds and music too. Speed perception in the PC engine isn't that bad at all, just an odd choice of colour scheme used. It does have the grand iconic entrance to the first stage though. In terms of steering, this port is actually really good. It would have been a little higher in this ranking if it wasn't for the colours used. In second place, we have got the Sega Mega Drive or Sega Genesis release of OutRun. For a 16-bit console port, the Mega Drive or Genesis version was surprisingly really good. Speed perception was there, controlling was extremely tight, weather dynamics looked good when changing stages, there was no slowdowns, and the Pass and Breeze soundtrack sounded very similar to the source material. A very good use of colours too in this game that reflected the arcade original. A very impressive port that many people should have been very happy with at the time of the release of this game. It even had the big entrance to begin the game with, which was a big bonus. And here it is then, in number 1 place I have ranked the Game Boy Advance version of this. This one released back in 2003, and it was actually part of a 4-game cartridge known as the Sega Arcade Gallery. Overly, in my humble opinion, it is the best port. To be honest, I thought the Sega Mega Drive or Genesis version was the much better port until I played this one. The music, for starters, is insanely close to the original, given its technical inferior sound output compared to the Mega Drive or Genesis. The colours are gorgeous and controlling and steering is top notch. The C beside the track as you pass it by looks really nice too. This is a great example that some portable games are actually better than the main console versions. So anyways, that's it for this countdown. What did you think of my choices? What would you have ranked in number 1 place? And just remember, before you get your knickers in a twist, this is an actual subjective video. So my opinion isn't official, it's an opinion, and that's it. But anyways, thanks for watching.